Greetings, ladies and mental gents, and welcome to my channel, where I like to make audio narrations of stories from across the internet. In this series, we'll be focusing on a web novel called There Is No Epic Lucha, Only Puns, from the website ReUpload. And in this video, we'll be doing chapters 97.5 to 99. I hope that you enjoy. There is no epic loot, only puns. Chapter 97.5. Death Pips In. Perhaps it wasn't the best idea. Jack hadn't really given it much thought. Leaping onto the jug of troll soup was an urge before any thought. Jack saw the jug, the boiling stuff that he himself had once been forced to drink from. The burning nightmare, as he came to call it. Jack, while cackling on the outside, was oddly calm on the inside. He had chosen his action, a target, and all the concerns were secondary. He had, fast, out of nowhere, hoped that he would make it another day. It was just the most idiotic tactic that he or his fellow kobolds could have ever come up with. But Jack was also just looking to die at times. Spending a few 30 or 50 years down here to make anyone a bit stressed. But as he felt the cauldron rattle and the stew spread, his existence went dark. Darker than dark. Dark like a somber mood rather than any lack of light. Jack was worried it had all been for naught when he felt that he was floating. Jack was scared that he'd fallen into the cauldron of slime making. But there was no burning or pain really. Odd. Jack was used to the aches and scars that he'd gathered over the years. Delta's contracts were good, but it was a slow work. His many bones that grinded from when they had been broken didn't grind, the flesh that had scarred didn't itch, and the mind that screamed with horrors that he'd seen was quiet. The last one worried him the most. He floated in the sea of pain and blackness. Maybe old Jack bit the biscuit, he mused, watching his words were swallowed by the queer place. It wasn't cold or hot, nor heavy or light. It was kind of middling ground of these things. Jack wasn't a fan. He was a firm believer in taking things to the extreme. Like Delta. That girl was a titan of making stuff happen. It was great. This place, he was trying too hard not to annoy him. And that annoyed him. Just as he thought crossed his mind that he would be done floating, he landed on something. He looked down, but it was more darkness. Just more solid. Right, Jack mused, as he looked around for any more shadows acting like shadows shouldn't. Tricky things, those shadows. Never knew who was hiding in them. Jack took a few steps forward and finally noticed that he was lacking his many toys. He looked down at his simple tunic and kilt. A generic piece of clothing from his home, something that he had worn once upon a time. That got to him a little more than he'd like to admit. All right, enough of this show. I want to see the big boogaloo in charge, or someone. I swear to Delta's mushrooms, if you leave me alone here, I'll make a bomb from nothing but my teeth and bodily fluids, he yelled. As much as the sight of that would be... I would prefer that you stop yelling and actually bother looking around before making threats, came a voice of a long, drawn-out boredom. Jack spun, and there was a room. Jack blinked slowly once or twice, and the darkness was just gone, and his study was taking its place. The crackling fireplace, warm, soothing heat, lit the room as the two squishy armchairs were arranged around it. The walls were lined with bookshelves, stretching towards the ceiling, so far up that they literally faded from view. Jack stumbled, but just a bit, as the gravity seemed to reapply itself. The solid wooden floors clacking as his claws left tiny little scratch marks. Jack steeled himself on the side table that had delicate vase. It wobbled, but Jack sighed as it didn't fall. Looking around, he tried to find that voice. He didn't have to look for long. A figure was bending down to pull out a thin paperback off the shelf. The oddity of the large brown bathrobe combined with the slippers were a little disarming, and the figure turned to reveal a gleaming bone. It was a skeleton. Jack recoiled as bad memories rose, but the person sat down in the well-used chair near the fireplace. Jack saw that he had been wrong. There was skin, but the man was so gaunt and regal, he looked closer to bone than flesh. Watery blue eyes looked up. Well, do have a seat, Jack. He gestured to the other chair that looked untouched. Confused, lost, and a little bit curious, Jack did so. The man opened his book and Jack could see the cover and a fainting human damsel being held up by some buff blockhead with flowing locks. The pure flower of Aidenshire. Jack tried not to comment, but looks kinda like the thing you get for a copper out of your aunt's basement. He pointed, and the man flicked through the blue eyes up. We all have our guilty pleasures, Jack. You and your explosions, I and my unrealistic romances. He smiled, and the expression only enhanced the skull-like features on the man's face. Jack could agree with that, but perhaps his broken mind was finally working, but something prodded him. This is not normal. Stop acting like this isn't normal. A bothersome thought, but Jack agreed with it nonetheless. So, am I expired? Jack asked in his best elegant tone. The man blinked at him. Are you a carton of milk? He asked with one arched brow. Jack scowled. Am I deader than my sex life? He waved his claws. The man seemed to hide a smile behind his trashy book. Well, I'm not in charge of your love life, despite my reading material. But yes, you did indeed expire, the man said, using Jack's words with a great amusement. He turned the page. Ah, silly girl, sneaking into the forest, no doubt to meet your bestial werewolf lover. I wonder how long the love scenes will go on. He mused as he turned another page. Jack stared. You're the figure, the end. Death turned 2 legs. Jack pushed, confusion at having died, fueling his rudeness. The man hummed. Not exactly. You can call me Pup, the man said with a smile. Jack was sure now that he wasn't dead, but so high of troll soup that he was going to die soon enough. Pup. Death is called Pup. Jack repeated with disbelief. Pup adjusted his bathrobe. Well, you asked if I was the end. I am not. Death is never the end. And all those overhanded tropes. The man waved his book and sighed. Pup is a nice name. I like it, and people have harder time screaming in fear when the name that they can scream is Pup. The man sighed, giving Jack a long look. Jack was forced to agree. He would actually rather die than scream Pup at any level of fear. It just was not going to happen. So you're the guy, though, right? The taker of souls, the deliverer of karma, the dragon's shadow, Jack pressed. The man looked some old, retired bachelor whose house Jack had dropped into, unannounced. That's me. Nice to meet you. I would shake your claw, but I'm getting to the good bit. Pup explained as he began to turn the pages faster. Please take your time. Not like I have any left, he answered sarcastically. Oh, pish-posh. Don't be a downer, Jack. You did well to keep that upbeat madness for so long. Don't lose it now, Pup snorted. He said it like he knew exactly what Jack had been going through. That made some sense. Death was expected to be a little all-knowing about the souls he ferries, but Jack wasn't seeing the boat around. Or a dragon. Or a mechanical duck. Jack hoped that the gnome's version of death wasn't before him. They really made the process of dying a roller coaster. So how do we do this? Do you pull out a big scythe, or do you push me into some void? Or is there a test? Jack asked rapidly. Pup gave him a weary sigh, and put the plain bookmark into his novel and put the book down. Are you truly in such a rush? Jack, you don't even know what awaits you, or where you're going. But alas, I fear that is more my fault than yours. The man admitted and leaned forward, face all business. Now, Jack, you are a delicate being. Usually souls are sorted and sent on their way automatically by the process of me being too many places to count and explain. I shepherd mostly humans, and there is a Kobold Reaper, but Pup looked a little annoyed as he gathered his thoughts. But he's a bit of a dick, Jack offered. Pup looked pained, but nodded. Liam tends to ditch extra work where he can. He's much more keen on pretending to be some chief in Calaman, Pup admitted with a long sigh of suffering. Jack's heart squeezed painfully at the name. Calaman, the Kobold capital. If there was even one. His home, his place of birth. He had only seen it in the shadows of dreams now. He'd forgotten how it smelled, how it was, how. So the duty should have fallen to Sally, who reaps general monsters who gain enough soul, since you were a dungeon monster in name. But Sally is in the middle of a divorce from her husband Ted, who reaps fishfolk. So Sally denied it on grounds of you being a contractee and not a true monster, which should have made it Marvin's territory. But Marvin is currently on holiday, so it fell to me since you have 2 legs, Pup explained. The afterlife is... Jack trailed off. He expected explosions, death, and demons, and amazing sights to blow Jack's rear off. But this... Pup sipped some tea. My afterlife is run by boring old people, Jack whispered. Pup huffed and he set his teacup down, the pink skulls and flowers doing him no favors in looking anything like a grand spirit of death. Middle-aged, if you would. Besides, this is what happens when people believe in different things. Trust me, it was all very simple when we were just one person. Then someone decided that we weren't good enough at Gothic enough. Then someone decided they hated their father and wanted a different death god. And then one became a dozen, and we had to have a business model and a holiday pay. Pup waved a hand around. Jack was ready to bury his snout into his claws. So why am I not just being automatically sorted by Sally, or Fred, or Timbuk, or Ram, or whatever the names you people have? Jack glared. Pup sniffed. He clicked his fingers, and the room didn't so much fall away as become slightly more fifth-dimensional. Jack hadn't known that he had a fifth dimension until he saw his soul overlapping physics. That's weird. I don't like it, he said bluntly. Pup snorted. Nobody likes it, hence why we remain close to the fourth as we can. His grunt was pointed right back at Jack. See the bubbling mess of contained explosions and streaking giblets, he said, and Jack looked down. Yeah, looks like a hamburger being crushed by a giant and then vomited on by a goblin, he agreed, wondering why this was in his chest. That's your soul core, a very center of you. That ugly hamburger is you. Pup explained. Jack led. My hamburger is wonderful and prime beef, he said. No hint of shame at his sudden 180-degree attitude switch on his soul. It looks like it would give all the demons indigestion, but I digress. The point is that while fixable of a sortable, it is also already spoken for. He reached over and pointed to the glowing orange patch Jack had thought had hot sauce, or some stain, or maybe drool. Delta the dungeon has put a contract on you, and she has anchored you to the dungeon of hers. Pup explained. He suddenly leaned in. By the way, between us, is she okay? I've been making room in my schedule for her skills, but not a lot is happening. Does she need help, or is the sister-son doing weird things again? Pup half whispered. Don't you know? Wait, who reaps dungeon cores? Jack blinked. Pup blinked. Marvin, but he's on holiday, since he doesn't get much work and was getting bored. So, is Delta broken, or is she? Pup made a waffling gesture. Oddly, Jack was getting annoyed on behalf of Delta. He wondered if this was a contract or... Have a drink, Jack. You need it. Jack, don't blow up my pygmies. Don't worry. It won't hurt you again. No, Delta had done this herself, worming into the old hamburger heart like a goblin she was. Jack couldn't even dislike her for it. Delta is a cracking core, and she's better than those other dungeons. I bet they need 30 floors to figure out which way to pour the drink, he boasted. Pup smiled and poked the orange patch. Interesting, he said, and a smear of orange rubbed off on his finger. Pup rubbed it back, and it flaked, floating like a snowflake as Pup seemed to stare with a deep intensity. Ah, I know this one. Delta, Is that what became of her? Pup murmured. Jack perked up at this. You know Delta. She said she was a human before, he offered. Pup mused in silence for a few seconds. Not well. Her soul arrived by a hook, not very pleasant, but when the brother has naught to do but fish in the abyss for fun, he does find the most interesting things. Pup admitted. Brother and sister. Jack frowned. Where had he heard that before? Old memories from his childhood, long forgotten, trickling past his memories. An old kobold, grey-scaled and blind. Old sage McNaw. Jack had utterly forgotten that the relic had ever lived. The sun and all her harsh love, the earth and all its dark secrets, they are not like us, but they are not perfect. The sun sets every day to play with her brother, and in the darkness, her shadow. Monsters were born. The earth grants us power, but also blesses the monsters. They are not gods, my little ones, they are nature itself. Cruel, but beautiful. The sage had whispered around a fire. Jack had been young, so very young. Needless to say, Delta has a soul that I saw in passing. Quite interesting, but alas, Marvin will see her if she ever does require our services. Pip said, knocking Jack to the memories and images already gone like snakes into the ground of Jack's head. So Delta's keeping me around, and you're here too? Jack trailed off quietly. Pip took no notice of Jack's sudden melancholy. Offer you a choice, as I offer all contractees. I can sever the connection to Delta and let you pass on to the form of afterlife, or I can merely let you be called back when the time is right. Pip held up both of his hands to show the two options. In this business, you, the contractee, would slowly have their natural soul replaced by Delta's perfect dungeon manner copy over the years. Pip began and smiled at Jack's sudden wide-eyed expression. Your previous soul would have been ground up and fed back into the core at a price. There is no doubt your soul is you. A boat rebuilt piece by piece is still arguably the same boat in spirit and all. And there is that knowledge that your soul would be gone from the cycle until Delta is also dead. Pip said and relaxed in his chair. It doesn't bother me nor Marvin. Sally can be a bit of a perfectionist when it comes to counting her lot, though. And Ted didn't help her there. Liam would come back and see the kobold causing a spot of bother and dive in trying to get in on the fun. Terry would sit back and Maurice, the cat reaper, and the overall whole thing would reopen a death's tournament to settle other differences. Other minor death-related gods and goddesses and non-gender specific deities would hop in and I wouldn't have time to read my books. Pip whined. Jack really didn't see how he was causing the afterlife to become a gambling addict. Listen, not every reaper is well adjusted as me, Pip promised, in his bathrobe and slippers, surrounded by literally miles of trashy romance novels. Jack was beginning to think that dying wouldn't be so peaceful at this rate. Sometimes we mess up and sometimes we fall asleep. That's why we get idiots who don't die when they really should have, countless times over. Sure, people call it destiny or plot armor, but really, I promise you, the reapers just literally worked to death and passed out. Pip rubbed the pinch of his bony nose. So, if I cut my ties, you get to read your novels, Jack summed up. Pip shrugged. I'm literally taking 30 souls as we speak. To one woman, I am a giant smoky demon. To a priest, I am a talking shaft of light. To a very annoyed to read out with no fingers. Point being that you don't bother me. If it's everyone else who's crazy, Pip exclaimed. Again, in the distance, the shelf collapsed under the mounts of paper covers, showing fainting women and men's arms for some couple embracing. You're mad, contracted, kobold with lots of achievements and karma under your belt. Your soul, while ugly, is hefty bonus to the afterlife. Pip hummed and leaned in. I'm thinking that you should give us the bird and go home. Avoid dying, because you will be fished out to talk to one of the others, maybe Sally, once she's done devouring her ex-husband. The fish folk are going to be immortal for a whole week at this rate, she grimaced. Jack eyed Pip. You're kind of a weirdo, he admitted. Pip smiled. Banish such thoughts. I am just a powerful creature of death that sits around in his home, reading trashy novels and giving out unwanted advice. I am perfectly normal, he huffed. Jack grinned. If I do die, can I ask for you, or is there some sort of paperwork that I need to fill out? You're kind of not a jerk. Jack nodded. Pip stood and stretched his bones, popping much louder than they would in any human or kobold. No luck, I'm afraid. I'm only managed to cause Sally and Ted to break up, Liam to get inspired with some new dish, and Marvin to get lost in another dimension by chance, and luck, so that I could speak to you today. So I believe this is until next time. Pip smiled and Jack crossed his arms. I didn't say my choice, he argued. Pip snorted. The orange patch grew by an inch. You need not stay anything. Pip promised, and then Jack was falling. Pip liked Jack. The mad thing had heart, an ugly hamburger heart, but it was pure and intense. He sat down and picked up his novel. He was sure he'd read this one about, well, the numbers didn't really matter, nor did overused plot. Pip just liked the novel idea that there was no good romance without death involved somewhere, like a third invisible partner that hung over their mortal hearts. It was like reading about himself in love, egotistical, and Pip loved it. His study was quiet and Pip knew that it was a lie. "Come out, I know you're back there, eating my books," he called good-naturedly. This guest was quite a little bit less annoying than his fellow reapers, mostly because the thing didn't really have a motive beyond being curious. From the shadows, a shifting shadow of many limbs and heads moved at angles impossible to humans until the being trotted out of the darkness to stand near the fireplace. White wool, 4 black legs and a mile-long stare and 2 left eyes. The creature was an odd one. Old but new, lost but on track. He was controlled chaos in a very fluffy form. The godlike sheep did not exactly speak, but its intent reached Pip nonetheless. The two had been friends for a long time, mostly because Pip couldn't keep the pest out of his library, nor from eating his first editions, but the creature was known for its followers and the finder of paths, an unusual God-centric religion that focused on sheep before him. Me lie? Perish such accusations, my friend. Pip smiled at the creature, and it pretended to buff his nails. I didn't exactly say that I was a reaper of humans. I merely said 2 legs at the best of times. You know that it's not becoming to brag of titles. Pip huffed, and the sheep chewed a rather smutty piece of chapter from one of Pip's books. You're such a prude, he sniffed. The godling before him merely passed in amusement and silently. It wasn't really a sheep. Pip could see that. Most higher beings could. But for mortals it was safer to see the form of a sheep than what was actually was. To be honest, the human mind preferred the sheep. It was closer than anything else in its true form. Still, the sheep pressed and Pip was beginning to roll his eyes at the chiding that he was getting. Jack would have had issues with me if I had said that I was the reaper of heroes. He would have argued and denied, and no one wants to have that debate in the middle of a good book. Pip nodded to himself. He was glared at. Okay, maybe I really did want to get back to my story. But come on. Rosaline Thiglina is about to bust into the evil fortress of Calamity and rescue her true love, Long Rod Robin. He said in another whine, but the sheep was already gone. Come back. I haven't gotten to the part where they become a threesome with the were-badger. He cried out, but the spirited door in his realm was slammed shut as the Pathfinder left in a hurry. Pip sat back down and grumbled to himself. He picked up his book and smiled to himself. No one appreciates true art. He sighed in contentment. After all, these books all gave Pip one thing besides the obvious lift of his spirits. A happy end where the hero wins, sleeps a lot, and Pip would never meet them. It was a sad hobby, but Pip did his best that he could. He turned the page and chuckled. Oh, there's a famous thigh crusher of eggs. Girl, you're deadly, he commented as he read on. The book would be read quite a few more times that night. Jack will respawn 5 days automatically. End of chapter. There is no epic lucha, only puns. Chapter 98, The Madness of Sanity. Delta watched with some hints of worry as Jack reformed. The price had been costly, but she had a lot of mana left over from absorbing the various rooms and monsters. The idea of waiting for 5 days had crossed her mind, but in the end, there were more pros than cons to the idea that went along nicely with Delta's own guilty feeling that she led Jack to his demise. Like a bolt shuddered once his body settled on the stone floor on the slab. He blinked a few times as he licked the scaly snout and tasting the foul air for the first time. The afterlife is filled with smut, he croaked. Delta sighed with a smile. Good old Jack was back. Doctor peered over him. He's breathing and he isn't leaking anything. I assume he's in good health, he announced. Delta turned her presence to him with a long look. I never said that I was a medical doctor, the gargoyle said promptly. There was zero hint of shame at that. Delta watched as Jack wobbled to his feet and stared at his claws. Where was I? I did see someone chap with the bathrobe. Jack asked in the group, but he turned away before anyone answered. I need to find a housewife pawn and offer it to the great beyond, he said in a hushed tone to someone who had seen something. Jack, are you all right? Delta called, and the kobold turned to look somewhat skyward towards the garden of Delta's dungeon. I just met someone that I can't remember rightly. They liked books of that nature, and if I die, I want to make sure I earn brownie points. Grease the system right. Jack turned, and the mare glinted full force. You saw someone? Dozer asked rudely. Jack raised one claw and dropped it. I don't remember, but I have the oddest urge to eat hamburgers, he announced, and looked at the ruined crater and the cauldron of slime used to be. There was a large dark smear, though, and it reeked of troll soup. That's going to be one to remember, he mused. Vanguard kicked the soot pile and halved dissolved weapons shifted about. Vanguard looked annoyed. I get you a nice sword, Delta offered shyly. Vanguard paused and then nodded silently in thanks. So, not to be rude or ungrateful, or myself, but why bring me back? Cost you a pretty penny, right? Jack stared roughly at Doc where Delta was watching from. Delta cleared her throat. Your knowledge, oh man kobold, is needed. You know this place better than anyone, she said with the grace of a dungeon core. Or so Delta mentioned. You felt bad about me blowing myself up, Jack stated. He picked his teeth with a bone shard that he found. There was zero doubt. Delta puffed out her cheeks. I can feel both cunning and sappy, he said defensively. The monsters around her all shuffled in silent avoidance. None of them agreed or disagreed. Delta deflated. Fine, I felt bad. Are you sure you're all right? She asked Jack. I blew up the old slime maker. That put me in a damn good mood. Jack grinned maliciously as a smear. Delta had to agree. The idea of some pot or cauldron able to endlessly make an army of acidic slimes was, worrying. Jack crossed his arms and looked around. Well, I owe you twice over all my life now. Guess I can show you around, now that we aren't drowning in slimes, he agreed. Delta watched as the kobold looked around as if he was going with bearings. Right, the few times I was held prisoner here, the place was run like a business model, with extreme consequences on fricking up. Tons of arrogant apprentices deciding that they could do anything, and if they screwed each other over, then that just meant the subjects on an experiment on. Jack frowned and he pointed to the many side rooms. The rooms closest to the exit belonged to the lowest dregs, barely smarter than a rock or ethical enough to not do crappy things to earn favor. He moved his claw finger to the other side of the room. The closest you are to the end of the room, the more of a brown-noser you are, and the more dark things you've done. Human experimentation, mutation, weird things. See how they're bigger and how better toys, Jack grunted. Delta frowned as she finally pointed to the set of stairs that led down into the lone basement door. It was set to the farthest wall. That was the head honcho, the smartest, crudest, and most dangerous egghead here. Jack's voice dropped with a tiny echo. Most times I was here, there were a lot of new leaders, scientists that managed to kill or dethrone the previous one by making some new way to kill people. But I heard rumors. There was a guy in charge, a real scary-looking fella. He ran things from the longest time before the Great Collapse. He made that slime cauldron and a lot of the really freaky stuff a long time ago. Jack hopped down from the gargoyles, followed him to the basement door. And that guy locked the head office, and since then no one could get inside. A real jerk move that I can kind of respect. The guy's office blocked any head scientists to come. Jack knocked on the solid steel door. What was his name? The doctor inquired with a deep interest. Jack shrugged. Never heard it. Kind of busy being tortured. Jack grinned darkly at the gargoyle. Delta shot him a look. That's not funny, she chided. Jack rolled his eyes. Maybe you can open the door once to do the dungeon thing here, he suggested. Delta closed her eyes, feeling her mana. It brushed up against the entrance of the lab, but even with the cauldron slimes gone, there was something projecting enough energy to act as a barrier. Delta had a bad feeling on where the source might be. We need to get inside that door, she declared grimly. Jeb waddled over. Move aside, please, he rumbled. The polite troll reared his fist, and the gargoyle scrambled. There was a loud crash as the door became light with glowing symbols along the frame. A dark lightning crackling furiously as the troll's fist stopped inches away from the surface. Jeb pulled back his fist to show blackened skin and bone. He stared. "Oh, not like punching," he declared. Jack snorted. "I love this guy," he said with a shake of his head. "That guy was a magical scientist. I'm pretty sure he did more than just lose the key. People have been doing all sorts of things that get inside over the years." Jack offered his vanguard, tried to jam a metal rebar into the frame of the door was simply melted. "Which means we need magic to open it," Delta guessed. Jack shrugged in an apologetic look. "Magic is as diverse as the people of the world," he offered. Dragon stopped breathing fire on the door. It was having no effect, and looked annoyed. "And that means what?" he replied with a wave of a claw. "It means magic is rubbish," a new voice interrupted. Everyone spun. Delta gave a small noise of surprise. She had been so focused, and she hadn't felt Quist reach the third floor. The blond man looked less annoyed than before. He had a chicken wing in his mouth and a goblet of something. He looked like he'd stopped by the buffet for some time. There was a long, silent pause. "It's a pretty goblin," Jeb declared with amazement. Ashley looked down, and she too seemed a little awed by Quist's pink skin and blonde hair. "I like this guy," Dragon declared as he inhaled. He seemed to have caught a whiff of something on Quist's scent. Delta guessed that knowing there were humans and meeting one would be a little different for her monsters. Well, it was Quist. He would at least be roughly polite. Ruli had been on the third floor, but Delta had a feeling her monsters had seen more of her demon side than anything human. Quist walked into the lab, a foul expression taking over his face as he eyed the many instruments. Was he sensing the dark magic? Was he upset at the horrors? Was Quist going to be all right? Underground evil lab. I really hate cliched jerks. He threw his chicken bone to the side and finished his drink. "I came to make sure you haven't unearthed an evil fire demon, or set loose a 1,000-year-old desert dark mage, or unlocked the door to the monster hell." Was listed as if Delta was capable of doing any of those things. She was insulted. "I just blew up a slime-making cauldron that had unlimited energy." She fired back. Thankfully, Doctor acted as a mouthpiece. "That was going to be my next guess." Quist hummed as he neared the door and then stopped. "What's with the door? Thing is literally vibrating with magic." He pointed as if no one else had seen the door. "We need to get inside so that we can take over the place." Dozer scratched his head. Quist looked around and the area, and he narrowed down his gaze and parted the door. "Well, good luck. The glowing runes near the corner that looked like two horses trying to dance over hot coals. Those are mana bindings, kind of like a handprint. This door is sealed, locked, bound, and many other annoying words. You need a sample of the caster's mana to even begin to unravel it," Quist explained. "Great. Magical DNA." Delta threw her mana and ebbed off of her monsters at the door in a futile act of frustration. The orange cloud splattered against the metal, and there was an odd clicking noise as 3 layers of glowing symbols simply evaporated and the door rattled. There was a silence as Quist turned at the various monsters. "Did Delta take and master the school of ancient tomb raiding?" he asked, voice faint with some hidden emotion. "I didn't do anything," Delta protested as she eyed the door. Her mana had undone the door magic. But how? Quist merely looked at the door and shook his head. "You must have already got a sample. Did you eat or meet someone who looked like they might be an evil tosser? Someone magically and slightly batshit insane?" he inquired. Delta frowned. Not unless the farmer of her early days had led a double life. Doctor told Quist this, and his eyes gained an odd glint. "Mana can be inherited as well. Some children or rare enough artifacts can carry enough of the caster's mana by means to be gleaned. Perhaps you met someone who was connected to the caster." Quist mumbled, his question not even directed at Delta anymore. The door shook as the enchantments began to fail, one by one. The last glowing symbol and the blink out of the simplistic vase. It faded, and the door creaked open in the creepiest manner Delta had ever heard. There was a foul wind that rushed out through Delta's dungeon and out of a front entrance within a minute or two. was turned, eyes alight, with a white fire in alarm. A spirit, left to alert the caster, no doubt, he spat. Delta had a bad feeling about all of this, but she felt even more worried when the spirit flew towards the town of Durance. Japes paused in the newest creation, thrice-sealed space contained within the earthen basin. Good for some more earthborn monsters. At his window, a dark orb floated with patience. Well, as I live and breathe, he smiled, and let the spirit in. The orb hovered like a ball of shadows for a moment before the face formed onto the surface, using inner red light to form features. An angry young man glared up at Japes. "You're at a sack of minotaur crap," the ball said in a deep hatred. Japes looked around, but Vass was still out. Good. The language like this was just no good for the boy. Oh, hush, Galona. You were planning on using my heart for your own inane empowerment rituals. Very shoddy work, by the way. I found the notes after I raided your room. Not very kind thing to do to your master, Japes mocked. The spirit sealed the glass sphere and contained the rotten soul of one of his most talented apprentices, roiled with a furious hate. I had ruled too long. I awaited you to succumb to age, but you are a monster in all senses. I had to act. I simply miscalculated. Besides, it's all for naught. Have you seen the lab? Ruined, Galona screamed. Japes idly rubbed his head as a headache formed. Galona was always a screamer. It's silly to be attached to dusty beakers and dark corners. A true scientist goes to where the results are best formed, without interference or biases. If you were a bit less obsessed with becoming a silly demon, or what was it called? A Terry boy? Japes mused, knowing full well what it was caused. He had to admit he missed the sending cocky apprentices into rage. Therion! Girlona screamed. Yes, that thing. Then you would have seen the lab of silence was restricting us, narrowing our focus to their goals. Who wants to research how to blind human darkness to the source? Who cares about bringing back the War of the Three? Really, so boring. Japes sighed and Galona was quiet for a long time. Is this why you imprisoned me instead of killing me? To see what would become of those who did fall in line? He asked. Japes' smile was demonic as it stretched from ear to ear. No, I simply wanted to make you regret trying to use me in such a pathetic science like you had planned. He answered honestly. Galona screamed and charged him, but Japes held one hand up and the glass went still. You mistake my patience and kindness. I have developed as a father and alpha to push my limits. Japes said softly. The orb cracked as a force pressed on it. I respect you for trying to take me down. Your pride and methods, as shoddy as they were leagues above the rest of the fools that tried to slither into my dead heart. Hence why you were spared to learn a lesson and the others were. Assets that I liquefied in the end. Japes' smile was distorting his face now. Galona spluttered. That cauldron. You knew that they'd try to unearth its secrets. The spirit huffed in pain. Japes shrugged. I knew that the cauldron would use anyone's soul nearby to make an army of slimes. Souls, rather interesting as an endless fuel if you can both sustain them and drain them. Like light through glass. Honestly, I had planned for them to eventually flood out and my command to consume early fodder of the silence. I take it the dungeon had to deal with them. How annoying. I hate to have caused a bother. Japes frowned. This made Galona splutter even more in confusion. Consume! You speak as though you're here to help this, festering town. The orb whispered. Japes leaned in. Oh, I intend to be one of their frontmen. I intend to march into the bowels of hell and silence itself with them. Japes promised. I don't understand. The orb was unsure, and Japes was reminded of the young lad Galona had been when Japes had found him, half dead and almost fed on the growing undead army. A waste of useful talent. As your teacher, even now, let me teach you something, my dear Gilly. It is not ourselves that matter in the field of science. No, it is the results and the knowledge we leave behind that is our true salvation. I will go when the time is right. I will use my greatest tools to learn how God can be sealed into a container with no walls. I'll learn this, and then I'll finish my greatest container, the greatest prison known to this world. I'll die so that my knowledge will complete the last pulsing cell of my heart. Japes was sounding now like he was aware of every pot in his home was shaking with excitement. Your work. Don't tell me you finished phase 1. Galona screamed in disbelief. Japes merely tore his shirt open on the front to reveal a deep, empty hole in his chest. A glass surface, a tough alloy that Japes had crafted, showed Galona his actions. The orb was struck silent. There was a window. Most of Japes' heart was gone, neatly cut away over time. He smiled, and a small, gentle smile. This seemed to scare Galona more than anything else. Odd. I believed that I wasn't willing to pay the price. I didn't deserve to see the reward. Japes hummed, and he turned out the window. But who? You don't trust. You don't have that ability. So who did you give this power to? Galona asked with fear. The orb crack was slowly healing. Good. Japes would hate to have made a shoddy prison. The only person who ever made my heart feel warm, Japes admitted. Delta felt like she didn't understand what she was seeing. The large circular room was bigger on the sides of the room and the main hall. The curved walls were taken up by endless books. Many were cracked and dog-eared, and every so often a portrait with amazing style and detailed landscapes and fantastic sights of green waterfalls, blue forests glowing with crystals, fields of flowers that bloomed like stars broke the books up to give room and more personal feel. The inner circle of the room had a large desk facing the door with mounds of tiny apparatus that had gears and flippable switches. Another desk held many rusty instruments stained with a dark brown color. Boxes of dry clay and other kinds of soil were on the floor, and scoops out of each seemed to be missing. It was not as bad as Delta was expecting, except for the giant tree in the middle of the room that, instead of bark on one side, had a broken sack filled with some dry sludge. The larger tear in the sack showed that there was something had either been cut free or broke free. The tree reached the ceiling, and Delta was reminded of Maestro, where the branches turned into roots and dug into the soil. The large pool of dusty green slime that must have been in the sack stunk, even now, of alcohol, disinfectant, and earthly plants. I live in a town where weird crap happens, so trust me when I say that I know weird. And this has left me speechless, Quiz stated, breaking the odd, frozen grip over the group. If someone emerges from the shadows with blonde hair, wearing sunglasses underground at night, we shoot first and ask questions later. I won't have stupid puzzles in my dungeon, Delta said, words just tumbling out of her mouth. Her monsters all seemed to look confused, but at least honestly. Delta was creeped out by the vegan version of a horror movie mad scientist monster test tube. I know that would. Quiz's voice was flat, and Doctor turned to see the heat wave shivering off the man, and the floor under his feet began to bubble. Quiz took a shaky breath, and the heat vanished. His eyes began glowing white ember, and he glared at the wood. He was closer to the test tube tree than Delta watched, as the wood itself seemed to ripple, as if trying to ooze away from Quiz. Don't think it's legitimate, but whoever grew this knockoff made sure it remembered me, Quiz spat. What is it? Dragon hummed. Some homegrown world tree that's already dying, and it was never meant to be live long. But to get a sample would have been insane. Quiz's fury turned to an actual honest curiosity. Suppose if there was 2 world trees, it kinda loses the shine of a title. Those who agreed. Quiz shook his head. It's weird. The tree is strong, magical, real magical. Nothing about the tree here wouldn't be useful in some spell or potion. Your average hedge mage could be some small force by himself if he used the tree right. The person who did this, however, used the tree and then just threw it away. That scares me more than growing the second tree, Quiz admitted. Delta then focused on something that was niggling her senses. That tree is the source of the barrier stopping me from getting my mana in, she said quietly. So, we need to destroy it and get the labs under our thumb. Kind of a bummer if we can't even take the tree in. I bet that'd give you some nice things. Dosa hummed. Vanguard looked like he'd agreed. Can't be helped. Dragon grinned and gave the tree a taste of his fire. The tree was untouched and didn't even seem to notice. Dragon blinked. Now that the tree nearly needs to die. He growled and tried to slash with his claws over the bark. He simply slid off the remaining wood and left no marks. "Allow me," Quiz said, and he held out his hand. An orange flame gathered in one finger. This action alone got the tree's attention, and it began to wriggle. Futile as it was, mutated thing bowed to the room. "This is going to feel amazing," Quiz promised aloud. His eyes flashed and his whole body became wreathed in a cloak of fire. He inhaled, and Delta felt some of that made her very heart grow afraid. His fire turned bright and bathed the room in silver. No shadow would escape. He didn't turn it hotter or denser, but his silver fire seemed to seek life, to seek thoughts and emotions. Quiz gritted his teeth, and the fire reluctantly left the monsters alone and began to surrender the shaking tree that was trying to grow half-broken thorns. A screaming face formed on the bark as if Quiz's fire gave it life as well. "Burner!" Quiz's finger snapped once. "Murderer," Quiz replied, far too calmly. The silver fire devoured the tree like a beast, and it howled, and the barrier vanished as the thing was reduced to ashes. The silver fire chewed, it roared, it laughed. Then it was gone, and Quiz stood over the remains with a large smile. "I love it when I'm right. That felt good." He grinned, and Delta was too scared of her monsters to make a sound. The fire mage turned, and he schooled his expression. I saved you the hard piece of wood and a bit of sack goop," he offered awkwardly. "Please don't ever say those words to me in that order again." Delta replied blankly. Doctor was all too quick to repeat her words. Quiz blinked. "Pardon? I put a lot of effort into holding back my white hot falls so that you can enjoy the outcome. I should have just covered it all and left you with disappointment." Quiz frowned. Delta covered her ears. "I can't hear this," she yelled. Quiz just threw his hands up. "I'm going to go back to Seth before he sleeps with your annoyed tree," he declared, and Delta uncovered her ears. "What? Tree? Quiz, what is Seth doing to Wyam?" she demanded. Quiz quickly hurried to give her the manner to space to work. "Quiz, what is Seth doing to my poor murderous tree?" End of chapter. There is no epic lucha, only puns. Chapter 99. Beta to the punch. Thankfully, Quiz had tackled Seth before he had gotten too close to Wyam. Without the keys that unlocked the way, Seth had pretty much been left outside the 3 large doors. Quiz nodded to Rennie, who had lightly napping nearby, as the tour seemed to be at an end for now. Delta watched Wine huff as she closed the door behind the 2 men, ignoring the deep thud of the door closed. Quiz dragged Seth back towards the jungle. "Drinks for all, come on, stop harassing everything with a pulse, and let's get some shots." Quiz cheered. His mood was still disturbingly happy. Burning that tree must have done some secret pleasure for Quiz, thought Delta. She would have to keep a close eye on him around Wyam. The rude one was a help. "I'd hate to have let down a louse to be a bother," Wyam asked lightly. Delta gave her a small smile. "He was, and thank you for letting him pass," she said, and Wyam merely met her gaze. "Being unable to leave my own accord made me to drastic measures." Wyam shrugged and won a large branch like a shoulder. Delta hummed. "I guess you're a bit rooted on the spot," she agreed. Wyam's cool facade broke as her lips peeled back in a pained expression. "Must you?" the woman tried and pleaded. Delta's own face was beaming. "Gotta make like a tree and leave. I'll be back soon once I'm done absorbing the evil lab and the crimes against both morality and humanity in them. I'll be back before you do it." Delta waved, and the cry in anguish was funny, and Delta had no idea why Wyam was such a drama bone in her. Drama root, drama stick. Delta would have to think on that one. She floated back down to the 3rd floor, wondering how the process was going. What vileness! The army paled before the mighty foe, as it took the room under the command of the great Delta. But this, it promised to be the greatest foe yet. Mana Squad 354, the Wiggy Woggy Bombers, attempted to dive bomb the smear that formation broke, as the flavor turned it orange and mana green with displeasure. This, what dishonor! It took steps forward towards this dreadful, though not tricky and cowardly as the gazebo. But this foe was its own foulness. Troll soup. The great knowledge of Delta offered a name, but the mana commander called it another name. Evil. But the distaste and illness were unimportant. It knew that. It knew that the countless of the squads could turn back and flee, but not it. It was the leading mote of mana. It was no coward. The soup had traces of Delta, the great and holy one, but it was mixed with reality, turned into a much fouler substance by the slime cauldron remains. It tasted like old chew dipped in oil and then cooked in troll soup. Much deadlier than the already fearsome troll soup. It charged, crying praises to Delta as it had a substance head on. The army followed, empowered by the commander's bravery. The slime was taken down, and many legends would be passed by this feat of heroic action. Delta paused and gagged. She coughed and spluttered as the foul taste coated her throat. Oh God! It was like killing her. She hacked, and the tears leaked down from her eyes. Finally, after much time, Delta licked her lips and tasted nothing once more. Memo to self, don't get Jeb to cook with gut rots. I can't take troll soup with bits of gut rot. I might actually break, she rasped. You look like something just punched you. A news box appeared now that the third floor was devoid of people from the outside. Delta wobbled on her feet. Tell me, Nu, have the gut rots made it down here? She tried not to demand, her mind in chaotic mess of oh and never again and blah. Nu seemed to vanish before reappearing. I'll refrain from teasing since I have no desire to taste what you have. Yes, but they have already mutated and begun to change. I do suspect that they are very far more deadly now. Oh, damn it to heck. Delta squared her shoulders. Nu, start feeding them the list of notifications. I got tons of them, no doubt. She asked. Delta had asked Nu to keep them all back until everything was settled down and cleared from the lab. Getting distracted from the battle due to pop-ups was not going to happen. Instead of an answer, she was given a neat stack of windows that she could pick up and read. Delta floated in the mess hall with a better light ambience. It made no difference to Delta physically. She could see in pitch dark of a dungeon, but it all felt nice to have a table. The first windows began to flash past. Slime-covered laboratory is now clear of threats. Absorption beginning. Slime mucus times 98 absorbed. 1 mucus gives 1 mana and DP. Value reduced as Cauldron of Life has lost power. Delta winced, but thankfully Jack's resurrection had taken a lot of mana. She took a quick peek at her own numbers before the notifications added. Mana 102 out of 300. DP 489. The good news was that she wasn't going to be suffering from mana overload anytime soon. Having to experience that so soon after the troll soup tasting, Delta might actually cry. The next few windows showed her some interesting things. Collection of broken swords, spears, daggers, 2 candlesticks, 3 chairs, 16 skulls, and a roughly estimated pile of broken scraps worth a total of 27 DP mana. Due to number of old skulls absorbed, you've unlocked the bone helmets for various monsters. Due to the weapons absorbed, you have gained the recipes for future usage along with blueprints for monster usage. What's the difference? Delta asked with a slight tilt of her head. Nu was floating nearby and also appreciating the gains, began to explain. The blueprints are generic ones that you create with your mana. They are the same every time, right down to the single mote of mana. A recipe for a monster, or just a drop, can teach that monster or a refiner to the recipe of the exact know-how required to make that item. The benefits for a self-taught recipe for your monsters will be, usually not worth it, due to how generic and mundane most monsters would be in a new dungeon. But as you're a weird dungeon with a habit of just throwing the rules through the window by accident, I say that if you were to get some monsters into crafting mood, the weapons would vary and likely evolve and change as the crafter evolved and practiced. Delta was quiet for a moment. So what you're saying is that I am awesome, she batted her eyes. I said weird, and I stand by my words. I love you too. Delta grinned. The next few notifications came and Delta blinked. Undead skeleton unlocked for summoning. Crude slime unlocked for summoning. Evolution for crude slime unlocked. Troll soup slime can now be evolved from crude slime. Delta paled. Her stomach gave an unpleasant turn. The idea of that taste, that smell, moving on its own and trying to be cute and affectionate made Delta both smile and want to hit her head off of the table. "I'll think about that later," she finally said, and the relieved menu quickly moved on to the next item. Cauldron of life fragments, times 15 absorbed, fractured and missing many pieces. They seem inert, but latent power could be unlocked if the dungeon gathered enough knowledge on certain arts and magic to recreate the cauldron. 15 DP. What kind of arts? She pondered. The menu shifted to show a little pixel art and a cauldron and the requirements. Delta blinked as she already had quite a lot of the requirements underway. Cauldron of Life Project. Have a deep understanding of pottery and containers. Proxy, Lord Mushi has begun this journey. Have a knowledge of various spirits arts and basic elemental manipulations. Proxy, Divina has begun this journey. Have knowledge of slimes. Slimes have been absorbed in the previous attempts. Dungeon has a basic mastery of crude slimes. This will only improve with usage of slimes or absorbing more slimes. Ruins. Process is being absorbed as we speak. Delta was stunned, but knew was already humming at speculation. Amazing. By allowing your monsters to become weird like yourself, you've enabled them to gather skills on their own that would aid you. Their evolution given by the system would contain knowledge that you would not normally have. And now the system is taking them into consideration as resources. Cross-floor cooperation. Holy jolly. Delta turned to him slowly as news seemed to stumble over his words. Jolly, I've never used that word before in my life. Delta, your head nonsense is spreading again. Do try to contain it. Praise the system, Delta mumbled, and then turned back to the notifications. Various research papers on many theories and untested science experiments absorbed and added to the library. 4 hidden journals and 2 magazines about home decoration have also been added. Summary of reading material. The formation of the ultimate weapon, theory incomplete and wildly marked with doodles. The chimera of monster and man. Theory tested with many failures. Researcher notes that they lacked proper range of materials. Dungeon will discard this as Dungeon has a vastly superior means to make monsters. The divination of the abyss. Researchers went mad after 3 pages and seemed to be using their own skin as paper towards the end of the research. Notes that the abyss is wide and holds many dangers. Also smells slightly of dark mint. Proto-dungeon core formation, a research with the great resources devoted to it, ended in a failure as no matter how well the core seemed to make the shape, no matter how crudely they funneled the souls into it, no core would truly be made. Research was solved by the interestingly, many pages seemed to be missing as if stolen. The research into various vessels of various means, the pages are almost a cookbook-like, and will be great interest to Lord Mushi. The process of being Therion, a rather gruesome grimoire, and how to transfer abyss into a human soul, as demons do naturally. The result was never complete. The researchers seemed to go missing. An odd note was left in the last page. Had potential but suffered from mediocrity. The manaless mushroom gut rot, a lab-created fungi that grows well in the manaless areas, seems to have been mutated with various ideas, but the research was discontinued when concerns were raised at the sheer rate of reproduction of the fungi. Warning, just a taste is known to kill anything that consumes it. Note of interest, the sample went missing. No known suspects. I knew something was so evil wasn't natural. Delta pointed at the menu with accusation, and then she frowned. I wonder how they had escaped and how they spread so much, she mumbled. Holy Dabagoss felt her nose tingle as she managed not to sneeze. She hummed as she transplanted her lovely locks, a cheerful yellow plant that soaked up the sun's rays into its new home. The container she used was an old one. She had purchased it from that lovely man, Mr. Japes. He had been oddly chuffed at the price and the time until she saw the Japes had some odd dusty shriveled up thing at the bottom. Poor creature. Holly had assumed Japes had been too shy to ask her to nurse the fungi to live, and so Holly did so quietly, out of respect. The sheer life those mushrooms gained was fabulous. Holly had kept it up to herself when they spread far and wide. Finally, some life in the mannerless place, but that was then, and this is now. The lovely dears, they were everywhere. They even looked like they might just grow legs any day now and dance. Holly hoped that they would. It would be a shame if Delta the deer had all the fungi fun. Delta hazarded a guess that durance was a safe bet and left it at that. Exploration of Shaft of End. The notes are oddly calm, but the words seem to just repeat endlessly, over and over, about the eyes that see, not that the heart cannot look away. There is a dark stain on the last few pages. Delta would save that reading for when she was bored or insane. Heroes and the effects of their power. Research into teens that rapidly gain power when the threat looms. The research seems to have much of speculation, ungodly input and theories on how such a hero could be used, but nothing much came of it. A side note said that all the village burning should be put on hold for the near future. Delta was beginning to think that scientists would just research whatever topic came out of the hat. Heroes, like RPG atypical teens. Sure, Dio was, well, and Poppy wasn't. Delta quickly floundered for a name. Grim was perfectly normal. Nodding to herself, she felt the last of her gains from the head office finally settle. Eager, Delta watched to see what would come. Artificial cutting of the world tree remains absorbed. Please hold as results are being processed. Delta stared. Did Sis just tell her to wait? That had never happened. Things were processed through the system faster than Delta could think. Results gained. Results have been extricated with some effort. Subject was resisting. It was reminded of its own mortality. Apologies for the delay. New jingle slowly. The girl needs to learn not to be so. He trailed off. Terrifying? Delta supplied. Quite. Window opened up and Delta felt a sudden odd pressure at her forehead. She gasped and put her hand to the spot. She saw the window turn vividly green, and the most emerald of gems and the richest of leaves. There was a feeling of being sucked through a straw, and the window had opened into a vacuum. Then Delta was flowing again, like the time Sis had shown her the edge of the world. She was leaving her dungeon and was now pulled across the land. She wasn't traveling to the odd tunnels that Sis had made along with the ley lines. No, this was solid and rough, carved and twisting into a mass of huge roots. She ended up in the large dark space. The roots, millions of them, seemed to collect in a large round cage of wood and pulsed green veins. Inside the cage was a single crystal about the size of a watermelon. It pulsed green. It spoke, and it seemed distracted, the tone of some old man who has too little patience for any guests. "Beta, I did tell you to hurry on," the man sighed, as he geared himself up for an argument. It paused and then seemed to turn the crystal slowly around. "Where are you? Are you going to use one of those confounding stealth powers?" "You know I detest childish games," the crystal warned. "Hello," Delta tried with a cheerful and politeness. The crystal rippled and Delta gaped as the glow turned inside out and roughly glowed eye looked inside of itself. "You are not the rude girl I was expecting," the crystal said far too calmly. Delta saw that she still had some warmth, so she did her best to bow and tried not to be too nervous. "Sorry for barging in and appearing here. I kinda got sucked up and dumped here when I found a weird tree thing." Delta trailed off. The crystal pulsed a few times. "Odd. You feel like a snot goblin who tries my patience, but you haven't cursed or made rude suggestions at my birth. It is. I'm not sure how to talk to someone who is polite." The crystal hummed and dimmed. Delta shrugged. "Manners usually like manners as company. I'm Delta. Where am I?" she asked, and the edge of tension she felt refusing to ease. The crystal pulsed and Delta felt herself draw closer to the cage. "No. Shield of roots and moss. You seem to be inside my being. A space that seems to be both symbolic and condensed version of my existence. It is a space which I control absolutely and find it very concerning that you have found yourself here," the crystal said, voice ever so slightly becoming curious. It was then that the crystal's words came back to her. "Did you say Beta?" Delta asked, voice oddly blank. The crystal pulsed once. "Yes, a charge that is still taxing me. You and her shared streams of same cloth, as it were. Have you, too, come to offer your services to the World Tree? The thing asked. Oh, it was the World Tree. The real one. Delta processed this calmly. You wouldn't want me, I blow things up. Delta promised earnestly. Oh, now she was panicking. She needed to get back to her dungeon ASAP. Ha, sap. No, Delta had to focus. Beta had brought me much progress as an agent to act on my end. I would think 2 would be making my goals approach to completion much faster. World Tree said, what a mouthful. Delta would call him a good nickname for a legendary tree. Delta was going to call him Drizzle. Eggy felt okay, but Delta wanted to be somewhat respectful, in case she blurted it out loud. Oh, and what goals are those? Delta asked politely. Drizzle merely looked for a second over her. I seek the eye that turned into the heart. Buried very deep, you see. Drizzle commented. The air was chilled, but it warmed at the mention of the eye, or the heart of Drizzle called it. And Beta, is she around? Delta peered, expecting to see another ghostly call, being maybe. Something inside of her yearned to find this Beta, another like Delta, a sister who knew what Delta was feeling, but she had gone through. It was a strong pull. Drizzle hesitated. She is still close to my roots on a quest. She will come some time. The tree offered. The air felt charged and Delta shook her head. Which way? I need to find her. Delta tried to explain, but even as she did that, she felt wrong. It was as if a deep part of her, and ingrained as her heart beating or blood pumping or thinking, there was a notion of an idea, the fact that Beta had to find her. Delta stumbled as the response snapped like an elastic band in her head, but she pushed on and Drizzle was beginning to do something, a deep glow that bounced off Delta's glowing orange skin. It felt invasive as he was peering into her deepest bits. He was finally looking at her. You are not a devouring monster of Beta's ilk. You are a slave, a cave of unnatural life and demented thought. You are of the 2. You are connected to the brother and sister. You are a dungeon. Drizzle stated. His voice had gone from grumbly old man to low unnatural rush of wind. Delta stood her ground, her face flushed. Since I have manners, I won't call you names, but I am a dungeon, and I do no sis. What's your beef with that? She demanded. The space began to squeeze down on her, like countless fingers pushing in at once. You have gained access here through... No, I would have felt it vanishing in my roots. I've been careful. I have never borrowed into a dungeon. How did you gain my power? Just lost, not shouting, but his voice had an inhuman calmness that was getting his answer. Delta wanted to yell something, but she couldn't breathe, let alone speak, and the pressure was trying to make her pop instead of answering. He seemed to be trying to dig into her form for the truth. Delta had reached the limits of her politeness and was going to just start doing anything and everything when there was a terrible noise like a tearing in the space. Resting on the root deep in the ravine at the shape of the 10-headed snake, Beta looked around as her skin prickled. Something. Her connection with Ig was twitching badly and she felt fear. She touched the root and human hand was strunk and it felt horrid and cold feeling. She pulled back and wanted to turn into a tiny rat or robin as if to hide. She remembered that feeling. Beta had felt that feeling once before and... Delta would never forget it. The pressing fingers vanished as a tear came a doorway of some gem-encrusted tunnel. A boy walked out in a sweet face with marred and wrongness and delight at the scene before him. I sensed a little sweat, and the next thing I know, Sister is offering to let me pick the game next week to come and do a little checkup. How lovely, how fun! The child clapped his hands. It was him. The demon child. X-Space seemed to retreat, but it held the demon child's own power washed up against it. The boy huffed. I swear, 1 week and I would be full power. You lot have a sucky timing and the worst entertainment. He cut himself off as he drew Delta. He took off his imaginary glasses as if to rub them before he broke out in a horrid boyish smile. Well, if it isn't a... Oops, sorry, forgot that name was Algono. He made a motion and putting his finger on his lips. Brother of Earth, holder of the eye of physical affairs, the heart of the world, I... Did not expect to meet you so soon, Driscoll commented again, calmly. Delta wanted to annoy him now. Hey, you person. Brother waved weakly. Delta saw it then. The oddly twisting features on the boy scared her senseless, but that feeling of power was exactly like sister and brother. This was brother. Brother had made her a dungeon. Delta stared, but his words clicked. That's Driscoll, he's a world tree, she said weakly. Brother blinked at her. Yellow, horrid eyes. World tree? What kind of dickish name is that? What's next? God rock, almighty weed, Brother called, and then snorted. Well, a mighty weed would be kinda cool to see, he admitted. Where's the heart? Driscoll inquired, and Delta turned to him. You mind giving me 10 minutes to confront my nightmares and devil? She yelled. Driscoll reeled back as if struck. Yeah, respect the lady's wishes. Brother shook his fist in mockery. Delta eyed the short form, and every single aspect of her was scared, but she took a few steps towards him. I ain't giving your name back or anything like, Brother began before Delta cut him off. Thank you for letting me have all my friends and let me meet you and sis and all of that. Delta trembled as the unblinking yellow eyes leveled on her. Oh, brother, that's me, by the way. You're a weirdo. Sister wasn't praising you for fun. You really are a weird dungeon. He crossed his arms and then pondered things. Okay, you got my interest. Let's walk, wave goodbye to the mighty weed. He jerked his thumb, and the tree growled with power as it tried to press into Delta again. But the aura of sheer power easily deflected. I'd tear your branch from a branch, but all of that. But I don't have all day to make you into a rocking chair. You got 1 week to vanish or become something worthy of my attention. Brother warned as his eyes glowed once more and the shield branches of moss caught the dark fire. Driscoll screamed and Brother pushed Delta through the door. There was a fire that was familiar. The color was different from that hungry flame was. Exactly like Quiss's. But Delta was falling now and she was having massive deja vu. Please don't take my name again. I like being Delta, she yelled. Brother's dark chuckle was nearby. That's a much better answer than the last time. Come on, Delta. Let me show you all the way back. Please, keep all the arms and lost thoughts into the ride, or they may be due to be plucked for my amusement. The child warned, and the darkness rushed past like some spectral roller coaster. Delta hurled, and the darkness became splattered with orange. That's got a stain, Brother commented lightly. Delta was about to answer when the ride came to a sight of something. A giant glowing surface deep, so deep in the world. Delta could barely understand what she saw for a few minutes, and then it made sense. Awe-inspiring sense. It was the core of the world, and it was a twin of the moon that hung above the sky. It was the heart of the world. It was the stolen eye. End of chapter. That, my friends, concludes this episode. I hope that you enjoyed. If you wish to support the author of the story, there will be a link below. If you wish to support this channel, there are multiple ways to do so, which will all also be linked below. But the easiest way would be to subscribe and share my videos as much as possible. And until next time, I hope you all have a good one. And I'll see you all in the next video. Cheers.